Hi, everyone. I'm guessing we'll just wait for a few more minutes, maybe like 2 minutes before we can start. Just giving an opportunity to more people to join us. We'll start very soon. But in the meantime, just to take you all through what's going to happen today, we're going to have our keynote speaker. Then we're going to screen the film for you, the film that has been filmed by 4 refugee women, followed by a panel discussion with 4 experts. And then we'll have a Q&A round before we wrap up the session. I guess we should just wait till about another 30 seconds, 40 seconds. I see people are logging in. And as soon as we have lots of people who've registered, so hopefully a lot of them are going to sign up, and then we're going to start. All right. Welcome to all of you who are joining us today from across the world, be it North America, Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. My name is Priyali Sur, and I'm the founder of the Azadi Project, and I'm so grateful to each of you that you're taking out the time today on a weekend to join us on a crucial discussion like this on the importance of mental health support for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, all of us have collectively been through the 8 months of the pandemic. We know how it has impacted us, our lives, and our mental health. Now, just add to that, to the pandemic stress, an added layer of what a refugee goes through. The stress of being homeless during COVID, the trauma from fleeing war and conflict, and then coming to a place where the poor living conditions and the attitudes towards migrants and refugees only exacerbate their mental health conditions. So the film In Turmoil that we will screen today was filmed by 4 incredibly brave refugee women of Moria, a month before the lockdown started in March. As you will see in the film, even then, this is before the pandemic, before the lockdown, the women are almost on the edge. But through the process of filmmaking, they found a way to heal themselves. They came together to share stories and said that this was really the first time that they had found a space to talk and tell how they feel. It was the first time that someone had asked them to put into words their emotions, their fears, their anxieties. Those words, those feelings that we as a group navigated through an Azadi workshop in Moria came together to become this powerful film. But before we play the film for you today, I want to invite our keynote speaker, Arwa Damon, CNN's senior international correspondent. Arwa has reported from conflict zones across the Middle East and North Africa region, often focusing her work on humanitarian stories. She's a George Foster Peabody Award winner and a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist. She's also the founder of an organization, INARA, that works with refugee children and children impacted by conflict. So let's hear it from our keynote speaker. Arwa, thanks so much for joining us. Your work, not just as a journalist, but as a humanitarian, if I may say, and your commitment to the cause of helping and supporting people and children who've been impacted by conflict and war is extremely inspiring. I know it must not be always easy to be out there, to capture these stories, to tell these stories. It probably is heartbreaking at times, maybe even enraging. So can you just tell us, like, how do you do this? Like, what keeps you going?
A couple of different factors, and thank you for having me. You know, on the one hand, there is this realization and recognition that no matter how difficult things are, in many ways, the harder it gets, the more important our jobs become in terms of needing to tell these kinds of stories. And at the end of the day, you know, we go there by choice. The people whose stories we're reporting on, they're not there by choice. And they deserve so much better than what they're actually seeing and being exposed to in life. And yes, it is enraging. I recently wrote an op-ed that was meant to be for World Humanitarian Day that starts off talking about how angry I am at the trajectory of our evolution as a species, where being a humanitarian has become a thing as opposed to actually being the norm. And it is a lot of turbulent emotions when you're out there in these circumstances. But at the end of the day, when you realize that you have the ability to help someone, even if it's as simple as telling their story or sitting there and listening to them, I mean, I believe that that is a moral obligation that we have.
Just because you talk about these stories, the stories you have told are so powerful. I've followed your work for years now, and some of the stories, like I was even going through some of your talks, like the story of Yusuf, or the story of this girl or child, 10-year-old child in Syria who was sent out to bring gasoline because the mother couldn't. So I want to understand from you, from somebody who's covered wars, from somebody who's covered the Syrian war at such length and such depth from the ground, on the ground when you see people impacted by the conflict, tell us about what you see in terms of not just the physical injuries, but also the kind of mental trauma, the mental illnesses, or the sufferings that they go through, which is not visible to the common eye, to the human eye.
It is, and it's one of those things that is really so difficult to encapsulate, because even people that have been through these scenarios, that have been through war, the violence, the bombing, the having to flee, the adults don't know how to actually put their mental state into words. And I think one of the moments that was perhaps the most striking for me, and really did actually encapsulate the depth of the trauma of what it is that a lot of these populations go through, happened earlier this year in February in Idlib province in Syria. And there, the Russians and the Assad regime were carrying out this systematic bombing campaign. And you had those very dramatic images of everyone fleeing towards the border with Turkey, just a complete and total backlog, traffic jam of vehicles, people on foot trying to get away. And so we were filming this, and we had spoken to a family with a little girl who, it was freezing cold, by the way, freezing cold. And most of these kids didn't have proper shoes on. And this little girl just had on a pair of, plastic slippers. She didn't even have socks. She'd been walking all night. She wasn't crying. Another parent who we met and spoke to had just told her children that they had to leave their stuffed animals behind. They did not cry. And that was what was so striking, is all of these kids in these circumstances, hungry, cold, tired, scared, they weren't crying. And in many ways, the fact that they weren't crying was just so telling about what the psychological impact of what it is that they have gone through truly is, and just how profound it is, and just how deeply scarring it is. And, when that kind of trauma is not addressed, when they're not shown anything else to kind of balance out their narrative in life that's going to be a counterforce to that kind of a trauma. I mean, what kind of a chance does a child like that even have?
As a storyteller, how do you tell these stories in a space where there's been the sense of fatigue over stories of people escaping and fleeing, people becoming refugees, people looking for safer spaces? How do you ensure that people are listening, people realize that the stories you are telling about refugees or people who've been inflicted by war and conflict are real stories, and that their suffering is real?
It's hard, and this was also a challenge, that we faced when we were covering the war in Iraq. But there is a lot of viewer apathy out there. There is a lot of, oh, well, we've seen this before, and I think that's where the challenge and the burden of responsibility is on us, journalists, to a certain degree, to keep telling these stories and constantly looking for different ways to try to connect people to one another. It's all about finding those small connections, those things that, a parent might be able to relate to, for example. So in that story I was just telling you, I mean, anyone who's a parent out there has seen their child throw a tantrum. And the fact that these kids weren't, that's a point that parents can, perhaps relate to. It's really trying to look for those smaller details. But at the end of the day, it becomes less about recognizing that you're going to make a massive difference when you do go out there and tell these stories, because it's not just viewer apathy that, we're up against. There's also the other reality, and that is that, the power of journalism. You go in as a journalist and you think that, when you cover something horrific, surely something must happen to change the course of that nightmare. And, Syria and other conflicts have taught us that that's not the case, that there is no more accountability to a certain degree. And so you end up going over and over again, because, at least for me, it's to document history. It's so that those who are carrying out the violence, those who may win the wars, are not the ones who get to rewrite history to a certain degree. And we get asked that question a lot when we're out there, and it's one of the hardest questions ever, the question of, well, why should we talk to you? We've been talking to the media for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. You come, you film us, you leave, you go back home, and we're stuck in the same circumstance. What's the point of us talking to you? I mean, how do you even answer that question? And I just tell them, look, I don't know if there is a point in talking to us, but if we end up living in a world where, because of apathy or because of a lack of accountability or whatever the reason is, where journalism ceases to exist, that's a world that frightens me even more than the one that we live in today. And so you keep fighting, you keep trying.
So maybe tell us about a time when you really felt that, with all these efforts and with all this apathy that exists, that you continue to do your work, that you continue to tell these stories that need to be told and that need to be heard, that you really felt that it had an impact somewhere, that you really felt for yourself that, you made a difference.
Well, I mean, there's of course the story of Yusuf that you briefly mentioned earlier, and it was Iraq, it was 2007, and it was very similar to the way that Syria is right now, in the sense that, people were turning away from the story in Iraq. Our Iraqi colleagues were very demoralized because, Baghdad was still in the throes of this horrific violence with 100 unidentified bodies showing up in the streets every single day, and that was just in the capital. And, in the middle of all of this, Wissam, Yusuf's father, comes and knocks on our door, the CNN office's door. I was based there in Baghdad at the time. And his little boy, Yusuf, who was just 5 years old at the time, had masked men pour gasoline on his head and set him on fire when he was standing playing outside of his own home. And Yusuf sat there in our CNN Baghdad bureau kitchen, and he could barely open his mouth to eat rice. He was angry. He was lashing out at his family. His father had gone everywhere trying to get his kid help. And then he finally decided to try his chance with the media. And we had a conversation with him saying, look, to be honest, the Iraq story, most people don't really care about it. We don't know what impact it's going to have, but this is, the only thing that we can do. I cannot even begin to, I still get goosebumps talking about it right now. And this is, 13 years ago. We put the story out there, and the response was just mind blowing. I mean, my email exploded, CNN's phone ringing off the hook. The response came from around the world, transcending nationality, ethnicity, sect, you name it. People wanted to help this little boy. And I remember when I called his parents, and I was able to finally say, you're all going to go to America. You're going to get help. I remember going with them and, experiencing their first few days there and just how transformative it was. And I remember also the transformation when it came to our Iraqi staff, because again, this was obviously, their country, their people that were going through all of this suffering. And just to see people rallying around an Iraqi kid, it gave them that little bit of something. And I think that made me realize that, no matter how cynical I can get, the kindness of strangers is out there. There are ways to grab at people, to try to inspire people. And the other striking thing with Yusuf's story is that, fast forward, to today, for example, he's just actually started college, which is incredible. And he doesn't remember the attack anymore. He used to, when he was a kid growing up, he would tell me what had happened to him. And then I think when he hit like 13, 14, the memories just kind of, they faded. They didn't define his psyche. That horrific act of violence no longer had this extraordinarily negative, psyche defining impact on him. It was balanced by something else, which is also, why his story is really kind of the inspiration behind my wanting to start my charity. Because I do believe that, we can make these differences in people's lives. And I do believe that we have to.
Yeah. I was just about to come to INARA. It's like the perfect segue to get into INARA. But just before I do that, you said now Yusuf doesn't even remember that. That's not his defining factor of his life. I want to understand that, along with the kindness, along with the support that he got, are you aware that he ever got any psychosocial support through this process, and how important and how crucial was that for him to, come to where he is today?
He had, of course, absolutely. He had a lot of psychological support to try to get through this. And, without that, how is a young 5-year-old child supposed to navigate his own anger at a life? What fault did he have? What fault did his parents have? And then also coping with, a physical injury like that, going out, having people stare at him constantly, other kids pointing and staring, these are all things that have an effect on a child's development. Not to mention, on top of all of this, and this isn't necessarily something that, we saw in Yusuf per se, but in a lot of the other kids, is your parents are meant to be the ones who protect you. Your parents are meant to have all of the answers. They're who you go to when you're hungry, when you're cold. As a child, to go to their parents under some of these circumstances and their parents be unable to provide that for them has an added trauma on top of it as well. For a child to lose a sense of security inside the home, don't forget, a lot of times violence happens when the children are at home, especially in the context of war and in the context of Syria. When you're robbed as a child of that sense of security within your own home that's meant to be the safest place for you in the world, that really shakes you to your very core. And so if you're not able to, grow and develop and understand how to reattain that sense of security, how to reattain that confidence, no matter what it is that you may have gone through, how to reattain that, sense of dignity. We don't tend to think a lot of children as needing a sense of dignity, but they do. Then you don't have a chance of actually developing past what it is that you've been through. And this is also why, there is a lot of buzz right now talking about the need for mental health and for psychosocial support. And even though, the need can seem like it's overwhelming, because everybody who has been through these experiences has been deeply, deeply traumatized. It's also one of the most important factors that we need to address, because otherwise these wounds, they just fester, they cycle, they become deeper, they become worse, and they can potentially end up not just impacting the child, but this is one of the reasons, and let's face it, why people tend to turn towards violence. A lot of these organizations out there that are trying to recruit, manipulate young minds do so by giving them a sense of purpose. They do so by manipulating their anger that has been allowed to fester. And so on the one hand, I wish we lived in a world where we provided psychosocial support and mental support to those who needed it because it's the right thing to do. We don't necessarily live in that kind of a world, but at the very least, we live in one where by now we do understand that if we want to break a cycle of violence, we have to be the ones to give a child the tools to be able to break it for themselves.
And so, so coherently and so exact, so on point rather, I want to understand, like, where did the idea of INARA come into? You speak so passionately about children. Just what you have spoken in the last few minutes has been so passionately about the well-being of children who've been impacted by this, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's psychological. Where did the idea for INARA come from? And did you feel like that you wanted to have more impact than what you were having as a journalist?
100%. So I shared the story of Yusuf, which is kind of the inspiration out there that helped me realize that, as cynical as I might get, the kindness of strangers is out there. The children in need are out there. The medical institutions that can do something is out there. And we can, pull all these different pieces and put them together so that these kids that are falling through the gaps of pre-existing medical care can actually get help. But, fast forward to Syria, 2012, 13. And again, this apathy that we've been talking about. And I just reached a point where I was just seeing so many kids who were injured, who were just falling through the gaps in access to medical care, or whose parents didn't know how to navigate the system, that it became this idea of, why not do it underneath the umbrella of a charity that can access a lot more kids and actually can have an infrastructure in place to ensure that no child who has been so severely impacted by war is unable to access the medical treatment that they need. And on a personal level, it was a very tough time. And I really reached a point where the journalism wasn't having the impact that I wanted it to have. And I couldn't just not do something, having seen the need over and over again so many times. I almost became obsessed with this idea of having to do more, realizing that I had the tools and the means to be able to do more. And, we see these transformations in the kids that INARA is treating all the time. I mean, yes, we're focused on Syria right now, but hopefully, we have ideas and hopes that we would expand, well beyond that into other areas, because the kids who come through, they go back to school. We give their parents back something that they were robbed of. And quite often that is seeing their child smile again. That's seeing their child laugh again, thrive again. We've been talking about mental health and psychosocial support. We're trying to expand our programs to begin to address that, because, a lot of the times, and I'm sure you hear this too, is you get this sense among people where they say, oh, but the problem is so big. I mean, there's so many people in need. Like, what difference do I make? And to that I say, we're not going to change the world alone. Of course we're not. No one person is. But, you should never dismiss the sort of collective impact of what a large number of small acts of kindness can actually do. No donations are too small. No gesture is too insignificant. I mean, we've reached a point, and this is kind of also the basis for INARA, where we can't keep waiting for governments to step in and do the right thing. I mean, it's not going to happen. If we want to make things better, then we have to start looking out for each other. And for me, in many ways, I mean, INARA is my way of doing more and of trying to do better, I guess. To do better by all of the people that I've met throughout the course of my reporting.
Azadi also was built out of a similar thought, exactly a similar thought. While INARA works with children, Azadi works with women. So I just wonder, I know we're running out of time, just 2 more questions before we go to the audience questions. I just want to understand, in the children that you work with, that INARA works with, have you seen a sense of disproportionate impact in the girl children? Or has there been any kind of, a difference in the impact of the war or the conflict or just the abuse and the violence that you see in the girl children?
No, there is, not just in the ones that INARA treats, but also, in those that I come across throughout the course of my reporting, whether it's in war zones or in refugee camps. I mean, young girls, young women, teenagers are, of course, among the most vulnerable, not just in terms of the violence, but just in terms of, their own physical security. And then add to that the reality that, for a lot of these families who fled, girls end up being married off at a very, very young age. simply because their families can't afford to care for them anymore, or because, frankly, they need the money that they're going to get if they give her away in marriage. Incredibly vulnerable in some of these, scenarios that, you see in the film. That's something that I've reported on as well too, but that darkness of the camp and having to go out, and just how dangerous these kinds of journeys are for young women. And then of course, you have society's pressure. Unfortunately, part of what we need to do is also to educate the parents so that they don't turn to a daughter who has some sort of physical disability or some sort of scarring that's visible, and make her feel like she's less of a person or she's worthless because she's not going to be able to find a husband. And so, yes, in many aspects of it, girls are vulnerable because they have multiple layers of potential vulnerabilities.
And just the last question, Arwa. I know you've touched upon it, but I want to end on that note. What can people, who feel they can't do enough or who feel they can do, how can we like build that, inspire everybody to come out and realize that, these people are just like us, and, that there are geographical boundaries and differences, but ultimately the suffering and everything is pretty much like ours. So what would you say for, to inspire people to do things that they can do in their own way?
The coronavirus pandemic has actually been quite interesting with regards to that, because I think a lot of people before who would maybe, hear the story and think, oh, that's awful, but then turn away, are pausing right now, because everyone's been going through COVID-19. Everyone knows what that initial, fear was like of trying to protect yourself from the virus. And they could all imagine what it would be like to go through that if you didn't have running water or soap or the ability to buy a face mask or the ability to keep your child safe. And so what I say now is obviously different to what I used to say pre-COVID. But I think, for a lot of people, I would deeply encourage them to, look around, be grateful for what you have, and recognize that there are so many people out there who don't have, who can't protect themselves from COVID, who can't physically protect themselves from violence, who are frightened, who need so much more to a certain degree than we will ever be able to give them. But again, no gesture is insignificant. And look, if you can donate to an organization, that's amazing. If you can't, if you can volunteer within your own community with those who have less than you do, that is brilliant as well. Or if you can just go out and a small gesture of kindness to somebody in the street, then that is at least something. Because again, I'm not all, everything's coming up flowers kind of a person, but really, it all starts with us and how we interact with our immediate world and with each other, but also how we interact with the world beyond. And that is our individual responsibility. I mean, we are responsible for the way the world is today. Previous generations are, of course. But if we want it to change, again, that change lies with each and every one of us as individuals.
Well, every word you say is so meaningful and so passionate. Thank you so much. We just have 2 audience questions, so I'm going to take those before we let you go. We have a lot of students watching, and we have some professionals in the, in people who work as humanitarians, people who work in the refugee and the migration space. So somebody has asked here, how do you balance your work as a journalist and a humanitarian? Is it ever conflicting? Is it hard to keep up?
So I get that question a lot, actually. And the short answer is no, there is absolutely no conflict. I am a human being first. We are human beings first. And to reach out and help a fellow human being in need is not a conflict of interest, no matter which way you look at it. But, obviously it is And it does end up being quite a bit of a balancing act in terms of time. And at the same time, I feel like they complement one another. Look, talk to any journalist out there who covers the same kinds of stories that I cover, and they'll tell you that they feel so helpless so often because so many people need help, and they'll come to us for information because quite often we're in places where we're the only people who aren't part of, you know, what's happening to them. And we can't do a lot most of the time. You know, this gives me one more, you know, tool to be able to say, you know, if they happen to fit into our criteria kind of a thing, you know, here's something that we can do. But, you know, we're not out there reporting coldly on these stories. When we have a solution for somebody, when we are able to, sorry about that, when we are able to help out, you know, we do step in and help out. Everyone who I know does. And we are, many of us, you know, very deeply impacted by what it is that we witness. You know, we feel it and we want to do more. And that's part of what makes us human. And I think, you know, I would never want to go out and cover the kinds of stories that I cover and not feel anything, because the day that starts happening to me, that's the day I need to stop.
Yeah, I hear you. Another question, and this would be the last before we wrap up this session, is a student asked, in a COVID-19 world, if he or she wants to go and work as a humanitarian or a journalist, it's very challenging because it's very difficult to go out on the field. What is your advice?
So we've been having to navigate that as well, obviously, as journalists, and trying to storytell, which is basically storytell via remote. And, you know, since going is not an option to many places, my best advice is to basically do what we do. So we try to find characters to help tell the kind of story that we're trying to tell, and ask them to film selfie videos of their lives, of what it is that they're going through. And then we'll, you know, supplement that with maybe, you know, videos that we've managed to pull from other places. Because at the end of the day, even though you can't physically go there, there's still ways to sort of access someone's story and experiences. And yes, it is very different. It's a very different experience to be sitting at home and trying to tell a story versus actually being out in the field and doing it. But there are ways. I mean, technology has given us ways to connect to each other, even when we can't physically go there. And in terms of the humanitarian work, I mean, look, that's been really difficult because obviously when places lock down, you know, we can't take the kids in for the surgeries that they need sometimes, although we're trying to, you know, navigate around that. And you have to protect yourself and you have to protect your staff. I mean, in many ways, this is uncharted territory for all of us. And I don't think any of us really knows the kind of perfect way to get through this and keep doing our jobs. But I know, at least for me as a journalist, I'm actually reaching out and having fascinating conversations with people that I might not have actually reached out to before. And, you know, a lot of it is more in depth than it would have been before, because we're not out in the field and constrained by time, which we normally are, because, you know, you're out there, you're on a shoot, you're in a rush. Now we kind of can actually pause and take more time with some of these conversations that we're having. That adds an extra different element to it as well.
Yeah. No, Arwa, this is great. Thank you so much for joining us and you know, giving us your time, sharing your experiences, your ideas, your opinions, and suggestions for how, you know, students and professionals can go about this COVID-19 situation. We're now going to play the film for all our viewers who've joined us. It's a 10-minute long film. It's called In Turmoil, and it has been filmed by 4 refugee women from the Moria camp when the Moria camp existed and was not burnt down. So please enjoy the film, and we'll be back on the session after the film.
من احساس تنهایی میکنم توی کمپی که 20,000 مهاجر وجود داره.
من احساس افسردگی میکنم.
همیشه ترس با من هست اینجا مریام که هست.
وقتی که مادرمشون مهاجر شد آمدن طرف اروپا، خیلی مشکلات من زیاد شد و من تنها بودم. حتی خشونت بود که دستای ما رو سوختاندن. خیلی ترس داشتم. راه قاچاقی به دختر خیلی تنهایی خیلی سخته. یونانم جایی است که مثل مواری 1000 دخترهای دیگه است، دیگه خانم ها است که تنها هستن، مشکلات به سر میبرن، کوشش میکنن قوی باشن اما نمیشه، امکان نداره. تنها سفر کردن خیلی مشکل است، خیلی نمیتونستم. کسی را نداشتم که با ما بیایم. راه قاچاقی خیلی مشکل است.
زندگی بهتر هم داشت، اما متاسفانه برعکس شد. ما در جای زندگی میکنیم موریا که به نام جهنم مهاجرین یاد میشه، جایی که حتی امنیت اصلا به نام امنیت چیزی وجود نداره و خشونتی که در موریا صورت میگیره بدتر از افغانستان است. جایی که اصلا دکتر نیست، حتی شبا نمیتونی که تا تشناب بری و هر شب یک نفر کشته میشه، غذای خوب نداره، آب نداره. یک جا زندگی میکنم و بیادرم هم 13 ساله است، برق نداریم. خیمه ما در جایی است که کلا 4 طرفش بچه های مجرد است. اینجا که میبینیم نه دروازه داره و نه دیگه داره، فقط یک پرده است که از من محافظت کنه. و ایام خیمه است. این دو کانکس که میبینین بالایش از مجرد هاست که عرب هستن و پایینشان مربوط سومالی میشه. کلان مجرد هاست، خانواده نیست و خیمه ایم است. من زندگی میکنم، حتی اگر خیلی نیاز داشته باشم، حتی تا تشناب من رفتن نمیتونم. شبا تا صبح تقریبا 2 هفته پیش یک بچه سومالی به خاطر یک تلفن توسط چاقو کشته شد که فاصله زیادی با خیمه من نداشت. شبا تا صبح بچه های مجرد اینجا آهنگ پلی میکنن و مینوشن و
هر کسی که من از بیرون میبینه یه آدم قوی رو میبینه که همیشه در حال کار کردنه، دوست داره به مردم کمک بکنه، همیشه میخنده، اما اون چیزی که درون منه با اون چیزی که بیرونمه یکی نیست. شاید خیلی باور نکنن که من یه شخصیت افسرده دارم. اما این افسردگی بدتر میشه وقتی که من داخل موریایی که تو باید تمام روز تو، تمام وقت تو توی صف بگذرونی صفای طولانی، صفایی که خیلی ها داخلش هستن، باید وقت زیادی رو داخلش بگذرونی. صف واسه غذا تو باید تو صف وایسی، بخوای بری توالت باید توی صف وایسی، اگر میخوای دوش بگیری باید توی صف وایسی. صفای طولانی که 2-3 ساعت باید وقتتو بذاری تا اینکه نوبتت برسه. شاید وقتی که توی صفی بوی آشغالای دور اطرافت اذیتت کنن. همه اینو امید اینو داشتن که بیان اینجا زندگی بهتری داشته باشن، تلاش کردن که بیان اینجا به زندگی‌های بهتر برسن، اما وقتی که رسیدن اینجا رفتارهای خیلی بدی باهاشون شد و رفتارهایی که الان توی این کشورها با مهاجرا میشه دلیلی واسه افسردگیشونه. و فکر میکنم که همه ما حق اینو داریم که هر جایی که دلمون میخواد زندگی کنیم.
زمان این حمله به من دست میده که کسی بیاد سمتم منو بترسونه یا بزنه، یا زمانی که بخواد مثلا مثل اون قاچاقبر که میخواست من از شوهرم سوا کنه. بعد الانم که تو موریا هستیم من 3 دفعه بهم تشنج دست داده به طور خیلی فجیع. بعد اونم به خاطر شلوغی موریا و درگیری با همسایه. وقتی رفتم اونجا توی یاسو به من گفتش که آره باید مدرک بیاری، وقتی تو تشنج میکنی فیلم بیار، یا اینکه برو بیمارستان بزرگ، وقتی تشنج میکنی تو رو ببرم بیمارستان بزرگ، اونجا وقتی برگ بهت بدن که تو مثلا آسیب پذیری یا واقعا تشنجی هستی. بعد شوهرم گفت که وقتی تو اون حالتو میگیری بعد به نزدیکترین دکتری که من میگم تو یه موقع ایست قلبی نکنی، نزدیکترین جا همین کلینیک داخل موریا هست. تشنج دیگه هم این بود که وارد خونه شدم، برق و چند بار از خونه از ما گرفتن، قطع کردن. بعد وقتی وارد خونه شدم دیدم بچه‌ام گوشه خونه توی خیمه کوچیک، مراجم تو بغل مریم بود، هوام سرد بود. بعد اونجا دستام به داخل رفته بود، پاهام به داخل رفته بود، دهنم کج شده بود، چشم هم باز نمیشد. شدید تمام بدنم اینقدر میلرزید که اصلا نمیتونستم یه حرف بزنم. بعد صدام قطع شد دیگه، نفسم بالا نمی اومد، به خسخس افتادم دیگه، چشمام بسته شد، خوردم زمین، دیگه هیچی نفهمیدم.
Thank you. That was such a powerful film and a powerful discussion prior. I think that for those of us who are viewers, seeing suffering of this magnitude is both a powerful reset on our own lives and a call to action in some way. And today we have the privilege of speaking with 3 individuals 3 mental health professionals, all of whom have answered that call to action. And I'd like to introduce, without further ado, the following individuals. First, we have Dr. Lynn Jones. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, relief worker, and a writer. She's focused on the migrant crisis in Europe and Central America, and she has developed in the last 5 years a storytelling project that we will discuss in the next half hour. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Georgia Carrazzo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is a psychiatrist who works for the International Rescue Committee. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this organization. She's based in Greece, and she leads all mental health programs on the Greek islands. Finally, we are privileged to also be in the company of Dr. Nikos Gionakis. He is a clinical psychologist and the founder of the Babel Day Center in Athens, Greece. And this is a uniquely positioned program in Greece. It is a state-funded mental health unit specifically dedicated to mental health interventions for immigrants and refugees. And we will learn a bit more about his work and what he's seen as well. Thank you for joining us today. So I guess I would like to put this to all of you, but I'll ask Lynn first. When you see programs of the sort that we've just seen, what do you want the world to know about the conditions in which these individuals live, and what can a viewer, we'll circle back to this question at the end, but really, what can a viewer do to take action? Lynn, you are on mute. Could you please unmute? That's okay.
So I always do that. I have still not learned to unmute myself. Excuse me. I started by saying I'll answer those questions separately. The first one, first of all, thank you to the 4 women who made that film. It's outstanding. I've been in Lesbos. I was lucky enough to be there in 2016. I say lucky because the conditions were so different. I was in Samos last year, where the jungle has many similarities to what they've described, and I followed it closely on the media, and they've really captured how terrible it is. I've been an aid worker for 25 years, well, longer, starting in the Balkans. I've worked all over the world in the most horrific conditions, in war and in disaster zones, and I have never encountered the squalor, neglect, and inhumanity that I have witnessed in the informal settlements across Europe, particularly in Greece and in France. And I'm so glad that these women have filmed it and discussed it and shown and actually articulated that the horror of these conditions exacerbates the problems which probably could be coped with. But you come and you live in this hell. And a guy put it very beautifully for me last year in Samos, when he said, you know, we've been through hell, and then you put us in hell and you expect us to recover. And we lie in our tents with no decisions made, in absolute squalor, queuing for hours a day. And this is a guy, a young man, and our lives are on hold, and we regret coming. And this inhumanity is astonishing to me. This is Europe, which prides itself on its democracy and its humanity. And I have to say that other countries in the world, and I've worked a lot in Africa, do better than we do in Europe in coping and hosting and taking care of refugees. And there's some, you know, one of the things that the public can do in seeing this is be outraged. Write to your politicians and tell them this is outrageous. People have always moved in order to make their lives safer and better. And people, Versen Shire, I hope you've all read her poetry, she puts it so beautifully. Nobody puts their children in a boat unless the sea is safer than the land. People are not coming because of pull factors in Europe. They're leaving home because of push factors. Again, the film showed it very beautifully. Push factors at home, especially women. And
Absolutely. Yes. Lynn, you're absolutely right. No,
From
thank you. You're absolutely right. And we will talk about the unique pressures on women. I think they were,
because I'll just go on and on and on.
that's okay. I think that as you, the unique stressors on women were very, very apparent, both sort of reading between the lines of what these women have to say, and clearly very overtly in terms of their physical safety. I would like to turn now to Nikos and ask you if this correlates, if the film we've just seen with what you see day in, day out as you work across Greece, and if you could also share with us a bit about your center.
Unmute.
Sorry. Thank you. What we have seen is a reality that we are used to. I mean, this is the reality. And my concern is that is a reality that is wanted by the government, for example, not only by the Greek government, but the whole all the European governments, because they say that we don't want these people, so they must understand that they are not welcome, and this is a way to understand that they are not welcome. From the other hand, for example, they make it even more clear when they start closing facilities that constitute good practices. For example, until the end of October, 2 facilities that are of much higher quality in Lesbos are going to close down. One municipal in Karatepe and the other one is Expikpa. And today we learned that Expikpa is going to start the evacuation with the police that is coming the day after tomorrow.
Wow, you've learned this just today? You've learned this just today? Okay.
Yeah, it was spread by colleagues who work there and who offer volunteer work there. And sorry, just to say that government has declared that does not want good practices in reception because they function as pull factors for people.
I see, thank you. I'd like to get a little more context from you, Georgia. You're also obviously working in Greece and seeing a range of conditions. Can you speak to both what you see that is most urgent right now, urgent for you in the IRC, and urgent in terms of, again, what can an audience member in any way impact? And also, can you speak to the re-traumatization process that unfortunately does occur in many of these camps, and we've seen that play out just now in this film?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be participating in this event, and wish everyone happy World Mental Health Day. Today we are celebrating mental health. Even though we are discussing about very unpleasant and inhuman situations, I was thinking that I would describe the situation on the Greek islands myself, and what we witness while working and providing mental health services on the islands. But the film that we have watched a while ago shows all this in the most beautiful and vivid way, I would say. I don't think that I have something to add on that. But what I would really like to discuss, because you have asked me about how the stressful events that refugees and migrant experience has an impact on their mental health. What I want to say is that the refugees and the asylum seekers that are arriving in Greece are people who are fleeing from violence, are people that they go through violence, and they face continuous violence even today in the hotspots. For 40% of our people that we provide services on Lesbos Island report experiencing violence, and out of them 37% they reported experiencing torture, and 45 they have reported experiencing sexual violence. And this has happened before, during the journey, and also I would say here on the islands and in Europe. So being a refugee means that you are exposed continuously to violence. You have loss of your identity. You have loss of your autonomy. You have lost the vital and existential security that all of us need. And everything, all your systems, your social systems are disrupted. So you understand that all these do have an impact on their mental health. And what we're experiencing is that we see that people develop negative coping mechanisms so as to be able to survive while they are trying to meet their basic needs. And they are also vulnerable in developing, I would say, some of them mental health disorders, clinical disorders. But we also have people that they are coming to Greece and they have pre-existing mental health conditions, and all this experience and this situation that they face on the islands creates relapses to their conditions. On top of that, what I want to share, this is what all the refugees are facing all over the world. And on top of that, in 2020, we have the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. And this has increased more, I would say, the fear, and we have increased emotional distress, and they are really worried about protecting themselves while living in those camps, as we saw in the video. I believe that all this make it clear to us that when we want to discuss about mental health, we have to address all these issues first, and then discuss about treatment and about helping people. I'm not saying that this is not needed, but it's as if I would say we are having someone who has diabetes and they are taking their medication, but we give them pasta every day. I'm sorry for giving such a medical
that's a helpful analogy. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a really helpful analogy, actually. It is clear that there are problems upon problems here. And Nikos, you have spoken about and been interviewed elsewhere about the fact that for many asylum seekers, actually successfully being repatriated elsewhere is so critically important that they will, the ability to to treat their symptoms, their mental health illnesses, is almost secondary to them. That they are so focused on actually gaining asylum that they often do not even seek treatment when it is possible, if it could in any way interfere. Is that accurate?
What I say is that people, first of all, have in mind how to survive. And in order to survive, they may go through whatever means they may use whatever means to do so. And we don't offer them many possibilities to survive. And this is one problem. The other problem is that people do not only need to survive, but they need to live as human beings, to benefit from the respect to their human rights, to their refugee rights, if you like. The problem is that they are not allowed to access and to exercise their rights, either as humans or as asylum seekers or as refugees. And many times they are pushed to show that they are vulnerable in order to have access to these rights. So the access to services that do not exist quite. We are the only mental health service all over Greece for migrants and refugees. And there are different projects that are short term and so on, and cannot fulfill the requirements for doing a good job, even if they want. Anyway, the problem is that there are no services for people. So the other thing is that in order to have access to their rights, they must show that they are vulnerable. And this means that they do not take care of their mental health, but mostly they take care to show this vulnerability in order, for example, to move from the islands in which the conditions are very bad to the mainland, to move from a camp in the mainland to an apartment, to continue to stay in an apartment. Now this does not cannot happen anymore because they are thrown out of their apartments as soon as they are recognized as refugees. And there is a program for them, but the requirements to get use of this program are very strict, and so many people cannot have access neither to this program that supports refugees, but it supports them only for 6 months. Okay, so this means that people, their priority is to find ways to survive.
Yes.
So
Nikos,
they access services in order to get a statement that says that they are vulnerable, but after they get the statement, they do not continue.
Yes,
because this is what is their priority now, to get a statement.
Understood. Understood. It's an incredibly difficult bind that they are in. And Lynn, I wanted to ask you about a very specific initiative that you have brought into existence, and that is your storytelling project, something that you began in 2015, and that you've also spoken about elsewhere, including in a TED Talk. Could you tell us how this has clearly been a positive for children specifically who are involved in it, and also if there are ways to amplify this work on social media and to amplify these issues overall on social media that the audience can keep in mind? Please unmute.
I mean, you're doing it yourselves. The wonderful women we just saw are telling stories, and you see how powerful that is. And thank you again to them. I don't know if they're listening. I began this. I don't know if I'd be allowed to do it in Greece today. That's an interesting question. I started this project on the border of Macedonia. And one of the things I do want to emphasize, because we're talking a lot about pathology, is that I started it with refugees who said, we want to help ourselves. We want to do something for ourselves. And one thing that struck me both in northern France and working in Greece is even in the midst of hell, people have the capacity to be creative and to be resilient and to create community. I mean, one of the interesting things, those very early days in 2016, people didn't want to move into the big tents or the big containers, which were like 400 beds and no space to socialize. They preferred to stay in these tiny tents where they could make a circle, have a fire, decorate, talk, interconnect. And it's very interesting how people will create community in the middle of nowhere. So some of these refugees, for Sanjakal was one, they were moved to a camp and they said, come and do psychosocial work with us. And I arrived and we talked to children and they wanted to tell stories. So we're going to make a storytelling project. We gave them cameras. If they wanted to tell stories verbally, I wrote down what they wanted to say. they made film, they made pictures. And then we had an exhibition in the camp, which was just wonderful. We had an exhibition online. It's permanently online. We can give you the access to it. And storytelling is the most amazing thing to do because we are all storytellers. You just saw that with the women. And when you tell stories, what's extraordinary about these children is what they did. There was horrible conditions in that camp, but they put some of that in the film. But when it came to choosing their favorite picture that they wanted to show the world, or telling a story, the pictures were always of people they loved, things of beauty, things they wanted people to see. Even in this hell, they looked for beauty and love around them, and that's what they wanted to communicate. And what I see is that storytelling helps us actually, yes, it helps us advocate about hell, but it also helps us celebrate love and beauty. It helps us show to other people which bits of ourselves we want them to know, to relate to. It helps give significance and validity to experiences. We make our lives into stories and we make them coherent and we make them give sense. We don't always talk about trauma. Not everybody wants to talk about their traumatic experiences. They don't want to also be put in a hell where they have to think about them. They want to reach out and connect and make beauty. And if we can give them that opportunity, we can actually help in healing. I've seen even here in my own community how storytelling and nature has helped people get through COVID. So I think this is an intervention we could make use of in many places. I can answer more questions about it if people want to tell. I can put in the chat the website where you can just access the stories. And I'm actually editing right now a book will be published before Christmas, which contains
That's great.
stories. Okay.
Please do. I'm sure the audience would love to hear more and actually view more. Georgia, can you speak to this issue of not only treating symptoms, and by only, I don't mean to minimize. I mean, we have to treat these very difficult mental health disorders that refugees present with. But can you speak to also giving people hope, trying to frame and focus on any positive, as you know, Lynn has flagged that these people themselves are seeking and fronting in their work. How do you help people to stay positive or be positive when it's impossible to feel hopeful?
Thank you. I would say the best way to answer this question is for us to be able to understand, listen to the people that they come to our mental health centers and give them the safe space where they can feel that they will not be judged, they will not be discriminated. And then, of course, we work together with them when we are discussing about counseling services, because this is something that we do. It doesn't mean that we advise people. It's that we are sitting together and we are helping them through our clinical knowledge how to find their own coping mechanism that they will support them to endure, let's say, these living conditions that they have to go through. It's about listening and respecting and understanding their worries, and also giving back the human, I would say, relationship. I'm sorry, I cannot find the right word now, that what you are going through is something that shouldn't happen to you. We understand that, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the strength as people to find a way to be strong and be resilient. And this is something that we see every day while we are working with all these people. I wanted to say something that happened after the fires on Lesbos. Just when the next day when the fires happened, we started calling and trying to contact the people that they are we are providing their our services to them. And what they were telling us was, we don't want to have treatment. We don't want to see a psychologist. We want to get out of here. We want a life. And you cannot help us. And I have to tell you that we were discussing with my team and our therapists, the psychologists, the case workers that we have in the center, and we were discussing about what people are telling us. Our own people that we have been working with them all this time, they tell us, we don't want this anymore. So what I want to say with this point is that people know what they want. They understand what they need. They know what they will make them feel better. And this is not living in such camps and the hotspots, not living like that. They don't need other people to tell them that, like us, mental health experts. What we are trying to do in our daily work with them is that we are trying to tell them that we listen to this and we understand this point that you have. The situation is this. Let's see what can we do now with the things that we have on our hands.
And in terms of actual interventions, forgive me if this is an ignorant question, but for those of you who are psychiatrists who are able, in theory, to prescribe medication, is there an ability to even track individuals, prescribe, monitor? Clearly, these are individuals who could benefit in many, many cases, probably from interventions. We know that even psychosis is a problem. Given there's stress-induced, environmentally induced psychosis for some refugees. Nikos, is it possible or even advisable to attempt to administer medications in these conditions?
Our psychiatrists prescribe medication, and we try to support people in order to have access and take the medication. This means that we need to collaborate with colleagues who work in the camps or who have the responsibility of supporting people who live in apartments and so on. Fortunately, this is not a major problem, if you like. The thing is that it is not enough many times medication. For example, someone says, I live in an apartment together with 15 other people whom I don't know. So if you give me medication to sleep, I don't know if I am safe. The same is for homeless people. We saw one of the ladies in the film saying that this is my tent. There is no safety, there is no security, there is no door, whoever can enter, and so on. So, I mean, we usually try to build up a plan of care that takes into consideration not only, for example, symptoms of people, but also the possibilities, also the context in which they live, and how good it is for them to live there. And I come to what Georgia said before. It is as if you have, no, it's a little bit different. I mean, that if we don't care about the conditions in which people live, whatever kind of medication we give, the psychiatrists give to them many times, do not help, because medication should act together with other interventions, not only medication. But many times it is impossible to do so. I think you understand what I mean.
100%. And this actually underscores the point you made earlier in the conversation, which is that the most basic need for survival takes precedence over interventions that would, in a more normal setting, be very warranted, such as medication for sleep, for example. And yet, if you have to be hypervigilant all night, as we've also seen with this film, that is just not an option.
To make it simple, mental health intervention in such conditions is to improve the conditions, because what is traumatizing are the conditions. We speak about trauma of the people, but we do not speak about how traumatizing, how pathologizing are the conditions in which these people live. And it's not because this is life or whatever, it is because we impose such conditions for these people to make them or ask to return home or to return to Turkey where they came from. It's the application of a deterrence policy. And this is the official policy of the European Union.
I'd like to turn now to audience questions. We have some very, very good ones. We have a lot of very engaged and passionate listeners right now. Georgia, if I could start with you, and this is a question from a student. What advice would you give to a clinical psychology student regarding how to get involved with an organization such as the IRC, perhaps in a treatment capacity? And perhaps you could speak also more broadly to getting involved in these efforts.
I'm really happy to hear that people they want to be actively involved. I would say that first of all, getting to when we are students, when I was, for example, during my residency years, and I knew that this is what I really wanted to do, I started getting knowledge and studies regarding transcultural psychiatry and about the mental health of refugees and migrants. So having, I would say, starting having a good understanding and knowledge about this sector is very important. The easiest way, I would say, for someone who is a clinical psychologist and licensed psychologist is to see, first of all, in their country if there such a need, and tried to get involved in that. For example, I have started working as a doctor in detention centers back in 2010. I was not specialized yet there, so that was my entry point. And of course, we have many sites that you can check about humanitarian vacancies and how you can get involved if you want to work as an aid worker. But we don't have to, all of us, to work as aid workers so as to have a very important impact on that. We can do and we can help and support even by advocating, by getting sensitized about the situation and the refugee situation in Europe now, I would say, but globally as well. It doesn't mean that all of us have to do this kind of work. We can be involved in many initiatives that are out there, and they are very, very important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's
as
helpful.
a mental health professional, if you want to work and become a clinical psychologist working on an MHPSS, as we say, it's a program, there are many sites that you can apply. I don't know, Lynn, if you have any other ideas. Sorry, I am interrupting you, Kaya.
No,
but
go
Lynn
on.
was one of my mentors. I have started my I would say, training through one of the trainings that she had. She was one
that's
of my
fantastic.
tutors.
What Georgia is sweetly referring to is through Fordham University and the International Institute for Humanitarian Affairs, I run a course with UNHCR on mental health and complex emergencies. It used to be a 2-week course. In the real world now, it's a 15-week online course. I'm in the middle of it this time, but there will be another next year, I'm sure. And yes, I can give people details. I just want to, if you will allow me to speak, Kaya, I just want to support Nikos and Georgia in saying, actually, if you really want to help in this situation, and one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be in this forum here is, I go out to Calais or to Greece and I teach volunteers. There's an amazing volunteer movement who want to help. And they say, we want to reduce stress, but the stress-inducing factors, we can't change them. The rubbish, the rats, the lack of water, the 4-hour queues, the inhumanity of the ASO system, the impossibility of getting an asylum interview, the brutality of the police, the hostility of the local population. If you want to address those mental, traumatically inducing, horrifying conditions, it's not done anymore through individual. No amount of CBT, relaxation therapy. I rarely use medications. No amount, of course you need medication in psychosis, but that's rare. No amount of medication or psychological individual therapy will address the problem. It is advocacy at home. It's using this film. It's writing to your government. What is happening is unfairly, Greece and Italy and Spain to a degree have been dumped with the burden of being frontline states. And I have watched wonderful Greek people move from incredible support and tolerance and understanding over 5 years to anger and hostility because my country and many other countries in Europe will not do what they're supposed to do and share the burden. 1 in 4 people in the Lebanon is a refugee. In Uganda, there are the most refugees in the world. In my husband's country, Ethiopia, there are refugees. Why is it that Europe cannot accommodate this number of refugees? It is shameful and embarrassing, and I beg you all, don't let this rest. Write to whoever your political representatives are and say, this is the shame of Europe, what these women have shown. We went to Afghanistan, we caused the problems there, we've been in Iraq, we've messed up the Middle East, and now, what a surprise, we're causing climate change, we pour carbon into the atmosphere, what a surprise. People are coming here because there's drought, because there's conflict, because there's war, largely generated by high-income countries, and we cannot take care of them. And by 2050, there will be 1 billion people on the move. What are we going to do? It's political. And I, as a psychiatrist, I am deeply involved in politics to try and address that.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I'm seeing 2 themes in terms of the audience questions, and one is exactly this. It is, what specific steps can someone take? What specific advocacy can be enacted? You've absolutely addressed and given a path in a couple of ways. Thank you. But I wanted to pose that to Nikos as well. Are there very specific things that people can do? Of course, it's hard. The further one is from it, the harder it is. But please, this audience is engaged on this question.
And the day before yesterday, they arrived here in Athens because although it was directed to Lesbos airport, an empty airplane from Holland, hired by a group of volunteers from Holland, wanting to bring back to Holland 119, I think, I don't know how many places there were in the airplane, refugees from Lesbos to Holland. but it was not allowed, not even to land in Lesbos. And it was quite attacked by both governments, the Dutch government and the Greek government, because they say volunteers and active citizens cannot decide upon such things, and they should let governments do what they can best do for movement of people. From the other hand, we know that Holland does not accept to take any refugee from Greece there. From Lithuania, from what I know, they accepted to take only 2 unaccompanied minors there. Only 2. In Germany, and now also in Holland after what happened then, there are several, too many mayors of different cities together with citizens that put pressure to government to change its policy in order to accept people from, to receive people from Greece. Okay, so I think that this is an example how people can act. I mean, to push pressure on their mayors, on their governments, and so on, in order for this policy to change. This is something that they can do. From the other hand, now I don't have it, it's not easy to find it, but you can find it, I think, if you search on Google and Facebook and so on. Save Pikpa. Ask the Greek government to stop the procedure to evacuate this good practice facility in Lesbos.
Thank you.
This, through sending emails to each and so on. This is something. Not
Georgia,
everything, but...
Yes. Georgia, I wanted to ask you also if there is an avenue you'd like to share that we haven't talked about. And also I'd like to ask what type of medical providers are most needed in the camps in your estimation?
Yeah, thank you. I will answer first the last question. I am mainly involved in the mental health sector, so I have to say that on the Greek islands, the need for specialized services and even psychiatric care, it's something that is there. Unfortunately, the public health system doesn't have the capacity, even for the, I would say, the few cases that they need to be hospitalized. And so this is something that it's an ongoing need when we are discussing about medical care, and I am discussing about mental health in particular. But I would say all kind of specialities like pediatricians, gynecologists are needed. General practitioners are needed. I would like to have a comment on regarding what it could be done, and say that I invite everyone to read and get familiar with the proposal that it came out a few weeks ago by the European Commission regarding the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, and read this and understand what is there proposed, and also to understand that what it seems to come out of that is that camps like Moria, the old Moria, it seems that they will become the blueprint of the EU's future approach for forced migration. And we are discussing about policies, about detention approach and deterrence of the people. So this is going not to solve the problem, but it's rather going to have this, we will continue and even deteriorate, and we will worsen the problem. So I would like to invite everyone to get familiar with that, because this is the policy that it's going to be implemented in Europe. And for us as IRC, we advocate and we are requesting that we need to come out and ask all the institutions, that governmental institutions, the European institutions, that people must have their human rights protected. We are requesting for the immediately lift of the restriction of movement. These islands are prisons for people. We are requesting to decongest the camps and the rigs, the hotspots, because people are forced to live in overcrowded camps. And now also with COVID, we are facing, I would say, a health public problem. We are requesting to improve the people's access to essential needs, food, healthcare, and protection. One last comment regarding IRC's recommendations is that in November, IRC is going to publish the second mental health report, where there we are going to provide recommendations that in detail for governmental institutions, for local authorities, for European authorities, for other NGOs, and the whole, I would say, key policymakers. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into much detail, but I am just sharing this information that in November we will publish that. And it's going to be a mental health report for the Greek islands for the past 2 years.
Thank you so much. I would also want to draw the audience members' attention to the chat if you're not already there. Lynn and others have been posting in real time some very helpful, actionable statements along the lines that we're discussing, and also the Azadi Project has posted their own campaign. So please do have a look at the chat now or after the program concludes. Another theme I'm seeing here, and that I think is on everyone's mind having watched the film, is the specific plight of women. Are there safeguards in place? Lynn, I'll put this to you first. I know everyone has expertise in this on this panel, but are there safeguards of any sort in place for women in these camps? For example, it doesn't seem like it from the film, but is there any sort of policy to keep single men in different parts of a camp? It feels like it's such a basic intervention. Does that ever happen? That's okay. Here we go. You're unmuting.
First of all, I haven't been on Lesbos for a year, and I was only on Samos last year and in Calais this year. As far as I can see, the answer is no, but Georgia is in a better position to answer that detailed question. Here's what has really depressed me, that when, if we go back 5 years, when the refugees were allowed to self-organize and given the space to do so, they did much more to create just the kind of, first of all, there was more activities, more for young men to do. They were allowed to build proper shelters with rubbish collection systems. I saw both in what used to be called Better Days for Moria, the olive grove, long since disappeared, a beautiful space. And I also saw it in Calais, where they're allowed to really build something. Then people did create community structures and ways of policing and taking care of each other. When you come in and you evict everybody and you start putting pressure on everybody, all of that breaks down. And the people who suffer most are the women. And they are the most vulnerable, because angry young men, what are they supposed to do? So I don't think that you have lots of horrible young men. I think you have a very dangerous situation, again, created by a government that believes that inhostility and inhumanity is a way of deterring terrified, traumatized people who have fled horror and terror, and they think we can deter them. All they do is create hell on earth. And it's a nightmare. And I just want to add to this. We have not discussed, I'm so sorry we don't have our co-panelist Amy here. I hope she'll be posting something. The situation is no better on the Central American, both the Mexico-Guatemala border where I've worked and the US-Mexico border. Now, what you had when I was there is on the Mexican side, you have amazing human rights and charity organizations providing shelter in churches. There isn't anything like Moria in Mexico that I've seen. But what you have on the other side of the border and the asylum system, again, is a kind of hell with separated children, mistreatment, abuse of the law. What's happening? Let me point out that Europe and the United States are breaking their own laws. Can we be clear about that? I put it in the chat. There are illegal pushbacks. There's a failure to rescue at sea. There is imprisonment on boats off Malta. There is a discussion in my own country about whether we should put asylum seekers in offshore oil rigs or boats. It's disgusting. We have to change this. Surely COVID has taught us our need to take care of each other and support each other. And that has to be a global concern, not a national one. We're in this together, we live together, or we die together. That's as simple as that. Sorry about my rant.
No, thank you, Lynn. I think that your passion is shared by everyone. I would wager to say everyone who's in this discussion today. Georgia, did you want to add anything on the plight of women specifically, or any other comments?
To be honest, I don't have something specific to make as a comment. It's true that women in the camps are facing lots of, I would say, protection issues, and this is something that it must be taken under consideration. But yeah, I wouldn't at this point have something very specific to comment on this, rather than as IRC at this point, we have launched a project for children protection activities, because now after the fires on Moria, we wanted to see and assess what are the needs for children. And also this is the women protection is a big issue for us, and we are witnessing many issues on that. And we are now trying to decide how we could better respond on those needs and address those needs.
Thank you. And Nikos, do you have anything to add on the plight of children specifically? I know that this has been very high on the American radar due to policies of the Trump administration in the last few years. But do you have anything to add on the plight of women and children, or any other group that is triply overlooked, if you will, because these are all overlooked groups?
If you may, I'd like to share a story that we had recently in our center in Babel, with a woman who arrived saying that she came from an island and gave birth in Athens, and her baby was kept in the hospital where she gave birth, and they asked her she was homeless because she came from the island illegally, because people who arrive on the islands need to be there. They have a geographical restriction, but she was afraid to give birth to her child there, and so she came illegally to Athens. And she was offered, of course, the possibility to give birth in decent conditions in the hospital and so on. But after some days, more days, she stayed there with its baby more days than usually. But she was asked to leave, and to leave alone, and they kept the baby until she could find accommodation. This is one thing that I would like. They didn't say, I mean, you are homeless, we'll try to find an accommodation for you to get there with your child, with your baby, but go find an accommodation on your own and then come back to get the child. This is one thing. The other thing is with another woman who we follow since many years. She's alone with her kid who is 3 years old, I think, and she got COVID-19 and she had to be hospitalized. And the kid, she was alone. And the kid, what about the kid? You understand? Okay. These are two cases that show that women times are much more exposed to risks than single men or than men. From the other hand, we have so many stories of women with so much resilience that have taken the responsibility to help to support their families because, for example, their husbands had become depressed and could not function as husbands and fathers and so on. And they were so resilient and so strong for this. That's why we don't speak about vulnerable people or resilient people, but we say that people are vulnerable and resilient in the same time, but in different positions. And this game about trauma and resilience and vulnerability and so on should stop at some time and see people as they are, much more than only one thing.
Thank you. That's such a critical point. Lynn, I wanted to ask you the following. As again, I know, please break in, Georgia and Nikos, afterwards if you have thoughts on this as well. You've all followed a range of resilience, amazing humans who have come through this, come out the other side. What do you see in the refugees that you follow who successfully repatriate? Do you see, is there any pattern to the long-term concerns, mental health struggles that you see? The keynote speakers had a very, very buoyant message in discussing the boy who actually forgot, if you will. There are many processes that could lead him to no longer discuss the horrific attack he endured as a 5-year-old boy. But the point is, are there any themes that you can share in terms of later life outcomes? Or, as Nikos has just said, people are so complex. We are all individuals. Is it impossible to really categorize?
I will tell you a story directly to that point. I just want to acknowledge that somebody asked me a question about child separation, and there won't be time to answer it. It was a long, detailed question. So I saw the question. Just let me flag that separation from your parents, this is because we haven't addressed the American issue in the absence of me, it's about the worst thing you can do to a child, because the parent is the most a loving, doesn't have to be parent, it can be granny. The loving connection is what protects your mental health. And it just horrifies me that separation at the US border is like a mental health assault on the child. It's obviously worse the younger you are, but it's bad at any time. And it's easily remedied. It's just devastating. So I can't go into all the long-term effects of that. You're quite right to be concerned about it. You can read them up easily, anything on adverse child events. It's really important. Thank you for being interested in the topic. Let me come to this. I want to just tell you a story. If you want to go on YouTube and look for, I'll put it in the chat, Saranda Boguyevsky's TED Talk, please do, because she illustrates for me what Welcome an Asylum does. Saranda was 14 when I met her. I'm allowed to use her name. She's a public figure now. She and her sister, she was one of 5 cousins, 2 Kosovar families, who 19 members of the family were horrifically massacred in front of her. And, she put up her arm and she survived. Her little brother died in her lap. Both mothers died. The men had taken to the hills because they thought that would make the family safe. That was wrong. The children were left dying, surrounded by dead relatives, were picked up by another group of soldiers who took them to hospital. I came back into Kosovo after this worst phase of the fighting was over, and a journalist, thank you, journalists, came and said, Lynn, you must come and see their children. They had this horrific experience. We got them medevaced to I saw them and we worked with them for a couple of months. We got them medevaced to the UK, where we were very good with the Kosovo crisis. We took Bosnians, Balkans, we took refugees from all over the Balkans. We welcomed them in Britain. Saranda grew up in Britain with her father, with her cousins, with their father. She went to art school. What is she doing now? She went back to Kosovo, where she is a leading artist and politician. She is trying to make her country a good country. This is what asylum does. This is what a welcoming refugee policy does. It helps make a better world. Saranda isn't staying here swanning around living off benefits. She used her opportunity to rebuild her life, become an extraordinary artist, become an extraordinary young politician. This is what a good asylum policy does. You can see her TED Talk, just look it up. I'll put her name in and I really recommend it.
Thank you, that is profoundly inspiring. Georgia, do you have anything to add on the long-term outcomes, both positive and more troubling in terms of is the need for lifelong mental health care, for example?
I will start with a negative, and then I will give a positive story that actually happened a few days ago on Lesbos. So for the negative long life impact, it's well studied, and many years, I would say, not just now with the refugee crisis that happened since 2015, that migration, let alone forced displacement, do have an impact on the mental health. And studies show that we have an increase on substance misuse from people that they are the first generation, let's say. It doesn't mean, again, that I don't want to put labels on people. I'm just sharing evidence from studies that people, when they are not welcomed and they cannot have a smooth, I would say, or integration, I would say just welcoming. Let's not even discuss about integration. And they feel that they are left aside, and they have to live separated from the host communities. They will, some of them, we know that they will have problems with their mental health, and we have seen that there are increased rates, as I said, for substance misuse and even domestic violence. This is something that it's well studied, as I said, but I would really like to talk about the positive part, and that people and refugees and migrants should not be counted as numbers and statistics. They're individuals, they're human beings, and thank God we have good stories to share. And for us, a great story that gave great pleasure to IRC staff on Lesbos is that one of the people that we were providing services a few years ago now has found a job, and he's working in the humanitarian sector, and is actually supporting with his skills and all his strength the refugees on the island right now. So we know that people can get through this, and they can use this experience and become great paradigms of what it means to welcome someone that was forced to leave their country.
Thank you, and I agree. This is why I almost hesitated to ask the question, because one doesn't want to assume that there are any easy, quick ways to summarize, this range of experience and how it plays out later in life. One last question to end on what is a hopeful note, and I'll ask Lynn. I'll put this to you again. Please just jump in, as this will be the last question, and that is, what parts of the world, what countries rather, do have good policies, good refugee welcome policies? Who can we look to and hope to see the models elsewhere?
Uganda's exemplary. I actually worked there a long time ago, and it was a very tough time, but really one of the things they've allowed is for refugees to integrate. They don't encamp refugees, which creates all sorts of problems. It's a long discussion. I'm very impressed with the Venezuelan crisis. Two of the highest, there are two small islands in the Caribbean that are hosting an enormous number of refugees relative to their population. And I don't know enough about what they're doing actually, but I'm just so impressed that these two islands, they're up in the top 3 refugee hosting countries because of the number they've taken in proportion to into their population. And in Europe, we have to look to the Scandinavian countries who had, there are lots of challenges now, but, exemplary integration policies, welcoming packages. Germany has also done really well. So I would say Germany and the Scandinavian countries, Uganda, Ethiopia has better than us policy. It's extraordinary to me that the countries in the so-called, the low-income, so-called developing countries are in this issue more developed than we are. I don't even like using the term developing, because we could develop some of their policies in terms of welcoming their neighbors from many of the conflicts to which we've contributed.
I want to thank you all so much for your service to humanity, truly, to these most vulnerable humans. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to turn to the Azadi board member, Mariam Zar, who will give some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Kaya, and thank you to the panelists. That was an incredibly interesting conversation, even I assume for everyone, because I can see how engaged everyone is in the chat, but even for me, having studied this and been to Moria, that was an incredibly interesting conversation, and thank you to all of you. Hi everyone, my name is Mariam Zar. I am an Azadi board member, and I'm so proud to be able to join this event today along with all of you for this important screening and panel discussion. Thank you for joining us. This film was made on Lesbos Island with footage from refugees at Moria camp, who had joined the Azadi Project for a 2-week storytelling workshop where they learned digital skills that would help them grow their voice and tell the world about their own challenges and triumphs. I was lucky enough to be there for that workshop and heard many of their stories. I echo what was said in this panel today. These people have endured much and have fled from unbearable circumstances, only to land in more unbearable circumstances. Supporting and empowering them can be done in various ways, from aid to political pressure for better global immigration policies, to engage with nonprofits who are helping on the ground, like Azadi. Our aim with every Azadi workshop is to create awareness around issues about which our audience may not have known, and to move them to look for ways to have an impact. I'm one of those people. I learned about the work of Azadi a few years ago, and I decided to join them to help their work reach more people. Last winter, I was able to travel with Azadi to Moria camp and took part in a project that I could see in real time was empowering women with each passing day. I'm incredibly proud to have been able to be part of that program and to meet the women that I did. I speak Farsi, and so the Afghan women could speak with me in their own language. I learned a lot about their circumstances, and I've been able to stay in touch with many of them, and I continue to impact their lives along with Azadi. We help give these women hope by showing them that the world cares, and that together with them, we can have a collective voice that advocates for better circumstances for migrants, and in fact, better policies towards immigration. Please click over to our webpage to learn more and to donate. A few dollars can go a long, long way in a refugee camp, and I hope you will join us to help women transcend this moment in their lives. On Monday, we will launch a 72-hour drive to raise money to provide individual therapy and counseling sessions to refugees in need. Please see the link in the comments and look for an email in your inbox and join us. Let me tell you that the reward is priceless. Before we end this important event, we want to thank all the refugee women who helped create this film and all the people who helped, particularly the founder of the Azadi Project, Priyali Sir. Special thanks to Kaya Parina, our moderator, and our panelists and keynote speaker today. We'd also like to thank Mina Matsuka for helping shape this great panel, Jan Zedralek, who steered this work around writing a policy paper on the crucial issue of mental health support for asylum seekers. My own heartfelt thanks to the Azadi team of Vanessa Davrukas and Vasilia Anayotas, as well as board member extraordinaire Luis Dalmo, who has made sure tech runs smoothly today. We also want to acknowledge and thank our partners, Columbia SIPA, the IRC, the Berkeley Center for Middle East Studies, and the LA World Affairs Council and Town Hall for their support. Thank you all for joining us today and for taking part in this conversation.